Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Thursday, May 30th, and finally got a night without NBA action, for better or worse. So that is slowing down a little bit, but that does not mean that the NBA offseason rumor mill is not building up in its own right. So we have a variety of different NBA headlines to dive into today. Tyronn Lue agreed to a 5-year contract extension to remain with the LA Clippers, which means he, of course, is not going to the Lakers. Lue was one of the top candidates for that job, so we'll break down, first off, just the general picture with the Clippers as they head into this crucial offseason, and sort of subliminally as well, what does that mean for the Lakers in their head coaching search. We also got news that LeBron James, it was sort of expected this way for a bit, but he is likely going to be opting out of his player option for this offseason, which could mean that he could potentially leave Los Angeles and the Lakers. We'll dive into what this means for the team and expectations for LeBron in the offseason. We also have some rumors that have been swirling around the past couple days about Jimmy Butler and what his future looks like in Miami if there is an end to the run here coming up. So we'll be diving into all of those stories. Plus, we have Game 4 of the Oilers and Stars from last night that we are going to dive into as the Oilers evened up the series. And finally, we had a little bit of a controversial and confusing situation take place with the New York Mets and Jorge Lopez, which resulted in them designating him for assignment. But was it all just a misunderstanding? We will sort of dive into all of that. But before we do so, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To our live viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on all of the latest happenings in sports. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can leave a tip or donation at gsmcpodcast.net. You can attach a comment to that, and your comment will pop up on the screen. Again, trying to make the show as interactive as possible. Anything would be greatly appreciated on that front, though. But, my bad. Starting off here, want to first be talking about Tyronn Lue signing this contract extension to stay with the Clippers moving forward here. This isn't necessarily a massive surprise in my eyes. Ty Lue is viewed as one of the best head coaches in the NBA, and he's been very sought after, not just this offseason by the Lakers, but even if you go back last year as well, both the Milwaukee Bucks and Phoenix Suns were trying to persuade him to leave the Clippers and end up with them. And at this point, the Clippers really had no choice as long as they wanted to keep Ty Lue on staff. And as, again, we're going to sort of get into what their offseason looks like. But this is a Clippers team that is trying to remain competitive for years to come. They just signed Kawhi Leonard to this new contract extension. They're likely going to be paying one of, if not both of, Paul George and James Harden this offseason. And again, they don't have much of a choice considering their draft assets moving forward. So they're trying to capitalize on this window, and Ty Lue should be one of the best suited coaches to do so. So they go out. It's a 5-year deal worth, quote, nearly $70 million. This was Shams Charania and Law Murray of The Athletic that reported on it on Wednesday. So, again, Clippers were going to have to pay a price to keep him on board, and Ty Lue becomes one of the highest paid coaches in the NBA, which again is justified based off of his reputation. Now, it does sort of, again, I don't think that they've been backed into a corner really for a while now. I think that that's why they went out and traded for James Harden as well. Part of what we talked about the other day, too, was the fact that this is a Clippers team that is really trying, or not just a team, but a franchise, an organization that is trying to establish itself as a legitimate brand while sort of, as they are currently operating under the shadow of the Lakers, they want to make a name for themselves. So they are moving into their own arena next season. And this is sort of what we talked about in terms of the business perspective. They want to have star power headed into next year that they can actually, sell out these arenas and build up a legitimate fan base. And it's not like there aren't Clippers fans out there, but if there is going to be, up to this point, there is a basketball game between the Lakers and the Clippers in Crypto.com Arena, 75-80% of them are Lakers fans, and I might even be underselling it there. So the Clippers have all of these sort of hopes to be able to become maybe not even top dog necessarily, but at least establish themselves as their own entity and have a, bigger fan base. So I think that it makes sense that the Clippers have continued to sort of dig themselves into this hole, you could say, in terms of a roster perspective. Again, if you're just talking about sort of the business perspective behind it. And, along with that, we saw how good the Clippers were for a large stretch of that regular season when everybody was healthy. But of course, it just seems like every year now Kawhi Leonard is unable to go in the postseason. And as a result, as their leader, the team falters because of that. But they decided to sort of jump the gun maybe a little bit on Kawhi during the contract extension deadline during the middle of the regular season. Now, we also talked about this the other day that, when you're dealing with somebody like Kawhi Leonard, who is a little bit more secluded and maybe a little bit harder to sort of get a read on, when you have an opportunity to lock him down, at least from their perspective, they wanted to do so. He's somebody that they saw as sort of irreplaceable and that they need to lock him down. And again, the ceiling with him is always going to be there, but it's just a matter of, is he going to be available when you need it the most? And that hasn't been the case the past few playoffs. I know Stephen A. Smith made some argument, I at least saw a quote of it on social media, about how there's a case for Kawhi Leonard being one of the worst superstars of all time. I don't know about that, because just the talent alone, I do think that Kawhi Leonard is one of the most fun players that I have watched myself personally through, my lifetime, in terms of when he's at his peak. The two-way ability with him is just so fun to watch. And, I still do feel like, he does just have the ability to make any single team a contender when he is playing at his healthiest. But unfortunately, more times than not, we've seen the injuries catch up to him. But we had a little bit of an audio issue the other day when we were talking about this as well. This does sort of lead into the conversation of what do they do about Paul George and James Harden, because both of them are coming up on free agency. James Harden, we know, since he worked his way out of Philadelphia, that his intentions is to get a big-time payday, and Paul George is reportedly not seeing eye to eye with the Clippers right now as well, where he wants at least a max contract, and it sounds like the Clippers are sort of the perspective that they are not going to pay him any more than Kawhi Leonard, and may not be willing to match that contract. I want to say it's $135 million or something along those lines for Kawhi Leonard. And it sounds like, I don't know, at least for me, if I'm Paul George in that type of a situation, listen, I know that Paul George is not the perfect basketball player necessarily. He's slightly past his prime, but he is still, especially, if he ends up in the Eastern Conference, I don't think it would surprise anybody if he is an all-star. He was an all-star this past year, so even sort of quantifying it as that was probably a little bit disrespectful. But, I think that Paul George was at least in the consideration for All-NBA this past season, and ultimately somebody is going to go out there and pay him. And if I'm Paul George, I'm probably offended by the fact that the team isn't willing to give me the same money as my co-star who has really struggled to play in, a significant amount of games. And like I mentioned, of course, when the postseason comes around, hasn't been available then. Kawhi played the most games of his in a single season since 2016-17 this year. He played in 68 games, but since he has come to the Clippers, he's played in 57, 52, 0, 52, and now 68. And this is the guy that you're not going to be willing to pay me the same amount of money of. And listen, I understand Kawhi was All-NBA this season, and I think deservingly so, but ultimately for Paul George, again, I think that his talent is going to attract a couple of different suitors. Some of the names that we threw out the other day, the Philadelphia 76ers could potentially try and go get him with their max contract spot. Talked about the idea that the Orlando Magic seem like after this success of a season, they want to go out and get a veteran, ideally not somebody that is too ball dominant, that is going to take away from the development of Paolo and Franz Wagner. But the Magic could go out and try and get somebody like Paul George who provides a layer of three-point shooting, which we know they desperately need. Paul George, I believe, just shot a career high in three-point percentage last season at 41.3% on 7.9 attempts. So not necessarily known for being, I think maybe when he was younger, more of a catch-and-shoot guy, but still can generate looks from the three-point line, can take over some primary ball handler responsibilities at times, but again, don't think that it would necessarily throw off what they already have developing with Paolo and Franz, and he almost feels like a really good fit, kind of, that they wouldn't totally throw off their identity. They are this lengthy team that can throw different defenders at you, can drive from just about any angle, and Paul George can contribute to that size. I'm curious whether or not they would sort of try and slot him into a two guard or more so just lean into having Paolo be their four moving forward. But I think that there is a lot of roster flexibility that they could do with Paul George. And I do think that Paul George would be worth, a contract similar to what Kawhi Leonard just got moving forward here. And especially when there are pretty limited prospects in terms of free agency this year, Paul George still does have some good years in front of him. If you are giving him 3 or 4 years on this deal, he's going to be, 37 years old, something along those lines, when it ultimately expires, and I think it's worth it. But got sort of off topic there in terms of the value of Paul George, but as for the Clippers, I think that ultimately here, when you look at where they currently are, they're going to have to invest in this team to sort of stay put for the next couple years. Again, from the business perspective, they want to be able to slap a couple players on a poster board in terms to try and entice these Clipper fans to come to their new arena. And I don't know if that's going to be Paul George, just sort of that conversation. Feels like they're probably going to be headed towards signing James Harden, which I don't hate necessarily. But at the same time, the Clippers, it feels like this experiment is not going to result in anything more than the Western Conference Finals run. I think that was in the bubble. And I don't think that they're going to be able to make it back to that stage again either. But I still agree with signing Tyronn Lue to this extension. He is a great coach, so if there's any way to make it work, I think that he would be the one to make it happen. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. We're going to be taking our first break of the show now, and when we come back on the other side, want to dive into LeBron James expected to decline his player option and what that means for his future and the future of the LA Lakers. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Now moving into our next segment here where LeBron James is expected to decline his player option, which does not come as a huge surprise. It sounded like LeBron was going to want to get one more type of a payday for him, but it does also put that little bit of extra pressure on the Lakers, I think, as well. Now, LeBron, it does seem like he's at a point in his career where according to the reporting surrounding this Lakers head coaching search, that they've been told by LeBron that he wants them to sort of prioritize Anthony Davis for who they choose to be the replacement of Darvin Ham after they fired him following their playoff exit. And I don't think that LeBron is necessarily... I mean, you saw him around the trade deadline sort of doing the little things to get the media talking and trying to put a little bit of pressure on the Lakers, talking about the tweets that he was firing off, the cryptic messages, and wearing that Knicks towel and all that sort of BS that gets aggregated because it's LeBron James, because it's the Lakers, and ultimately it's all stupid. But at the same time, LeBron does know this, and for that reason, he's put pressure on the Lakers in the past to try and make some moves. Now, he has an out now, and I think that the most likely scenario here is that he's going to remain with the Lakers. Probably from here on out, we're going to see him go back to his old philosophy of sort of having outs after every year. When he came to LA, there was a sense that he really wanted to legitimately live that LA lifestyle for, the foreseeable future, which is why after years in Miami and Cleveland of seeing him agree to these deals that would give him these types of player options just about every offseason, and he could rework his deal, make more money, and he wouldn't have to be locked up in a situation that he didn't want to be in. He trusted the Lakers that I want to be here for the next few years. Let's just get this deal done. And now is the point where LeBron James, at what is he now, 38 years old, that he can sort of take back a little bit of power to some degree, but I also don't think that he has necessarily that same level of power that he did for many years in the NBA, where if he were to leave a franchise, it would sort of have them entirely crumble and topple. But now at this point, we've talked about this on the show in the past, I don't think it would be the most devastating thing in the world for the Lakers if LeBron were to leave. Now, the Lakers seem like they are going to want to do whatever it takes to keep LeBron, because why wouldn't you, from both a business and basketball perspective? But at the same time, if they wanted to go into a resetting of sorts and, resetting, rebuilding, whatever you, I suppose, want to call it, either way, they can still recover from that, I think, in a decent way, because when in the past it seems like when LeBron James wants you to trade your future draft capital, you have to do so. And the Lakers held off on it because they didn't know how much longer LeBron was going to be in LA, and they still don't necessarily to some degree, but again, it's that sort of balance of power between LeBron and a front office. And now, again, like I mentioned, I think that LeBron is going to be back in LA for next season. He's at least put it out there. The fact that his top priority isn't going to sign where Bronny James is, at least for the upcoming, 2024-25 season, that he will be okay sort of not having to be with Bronny. Now, the Lakers are obviously heavily tied to Bronny James, and I have a hard time imagining if they are sitting there with the 55th overall pick that if Bronny is available, they're going to feel so strongly about another prospect that they wouldn't do that, at least, again, from the business perspective of it all, plus whatever upside Bronny may have. But that's why yesterday, when we talked about Bronny's decision to stay in the NBA draft and, give up his college eligibility, I don't think it just means that for any of these teams, if they draft LeBron James, like specifically the Phoenix Suns are one of the teams that Bronny is going to work out for. If the Suns were to draft Bronny, I don't think that means that LeBron is going to just immediately sign with the Suns, and especially considering their financial situation, LeBron would have to go there on a veteran minimum. And I also do think there's probably, and there's a whole lot that's packed into it, Bron has made more than enough money throughout the course of his career. He's still not going to turn down, I think, the opportunity to make more to set up his family for generations. But also, I feel like LeBron has enough of an understanding of the reality of the entire NBA landscape, and that him taking a veteran minimum contract could, I'm not saying definitively would, but could definitely have a ripple effect on the market for other stars. And again, I think that LeBron, who's been in this league long enough, who's been in the limelight specifically as the premier player for just about the entire time he was there, he does sort of understand the importance that he has in regards to his peers in terms of being able to put everybody in best position to make money. So again, I don't think that this is a situation where LeBron is just going to take a veteran minimum contract wherever. Now, there are other teams, a team that we didn't necessarily talk about yesterday, but for the Philadelphia 76ers, if they were to take Bronny, they also have a max contract spot available. So maybe that would be something that would be more feasible to me. Again, I think that LeBron is going to want to try and run it back one more time with the Lakers. Now, it is interesting to sort of see, from what it sounds like, his priority is still trying to win a championship. And headed into his age 40 season, maybe he feels like he does still have a chance to do so with this Lakers squad. Now, I don't necessarily know about that. The Lakers have a little bit more flexibility this offseason to maybe try and bring in a third star. There was just a report that came out yesterday. I at least saw the Bleacher Report notification of it. I can see if I can maybe quickly look through it here and such, but that the Athletic reported that the Lakers are looking to prioritize having depth in this offseason as opposed to going out for that third star, which I think is probably, a pretty solid approach if you ask me, considering the fact that they already do have incredible play. You look at that playoff series against the Nuggets, Anthony Davis played in what I thought one of his best playoff series of his career. LeBron James was very good himself as well, but it was just no help outside of those two that, I think that going out to sort of hunt the margins or such and, bring in depth and talent around the two of them, that's probably, again, I think the Lakers are probably at a point where they are past truly contending and being favorites for an NBA Finals, but when you have those two players, they already have the top end star talent. As long as they are still themselves, it's hard to fully rule them out. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section in terms of what LeBron is going to do this offseason and whether or not, if he stays with the Lakers, that they can remain championship competitive. But we are now going to be taking our next break here. And when we come back on the other side, there were a variety of different reports that came out in the past couple of days regarding Jimmy Butler and the potential of him leaving Miami this offseason. So stick with us. We will be right back and dive more into that after this quick break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Headed into our next segment of the day, we had a couple different reports, both from the Philadelphia Herald as well as a news station from Miami. It was the Miami Herald and the Philadelphia Inquirer, that reported on the potential of Jimmy Butler leaving Miami this offseason. Now, Butler has been with the Heat for the past few seasons and has led them to 2 NBA Finals appearances last year. Obviously, the sort of media love fest for Jimmy Butler in terms of him being, playoff Jimmy, Hemi Butler, all of that sort of cliche stuff. But it was an incredible run for an 8th-seeded Heat team to be able to make the finals like that and vastly overachieve on expectations. But there has been sort of some grumblings with, specifically if you look at Pat Riley, where he was pretty upset with the team following their playoff exit, and he had some words for Jimmy Butler, who was very loud despite the fact that he was unable to play after that play-in tournament game where he went down at the end of the first quarter against the 76ers. Now, he toughed it out for the rest of that matchup, but was then ruled out for the remainder of the postseason, and the Heat lost in 5 in the first round to the Celtics. And Jimmy was talking a lot during this whole stretch where he was trolling on Instagram, photoshopping his face onto Jaylen Brown, the whole "don't let us get one" quote going back to last year's Eastern Conference Finals. And then he also had an interview it was an intermission, I don't know if it was from the first to second period possibly, of Game 3, where he said he was sick of hearing about the Celtics and everything, despite that the Heat just won their playoff game, and the Heat kind of got blown out from that point. And even still, he spoke as well to the media about how if he were healthy, the Celtics and the Knicks would both have been out of the playoffs. So just a lot of commentary from Jimmy Butler, and Pat Riley was frustrated and said, basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but was saying, stop talking so much if you're not going to play. And it seems to be that there is a little bit of tension for the fact that Butler, as incredible as he's been for Miami through this stretch here, there is some amount of annoyance in the fact that he isn't very available ever during the regular season. You go back in this Miami stretch, he's played in 58, 52, 57, 64, and 60 games. And, because of that, for whatever it's worth, hasn't been an all-star these past 2 years. Now, it's cool when Jimmy Butler talks about, well, he doesn't care about all-stars or all-NBA teams or anything along those lines. But at the same time, it is not a sustainable playoff path to consistently, and there are other problems with this Miami Heat's roster construction. Injuries have obviously played a massive part in why the Heat were, and not just Jimmy Butler, but others as well, in terms of why they've been at the bottom of the Eastern Conference standings-wise the past couple years. The same Eastern Conference that everybody has been, dragging all the way throughout this postseason run, that the Heat can't even necessarily find their footing in the regular season to not have to go up against a number one seed. And in large part, again, it's because Jimmy Butler and his lack of availability that has led to again, that frustration. But the Philadelphia Inquirer reported on Tuesday that the 76ers would be open to giving Jimmy Butler a max contract extension if he becomes available this offseason. Jimmy Butler has 1 year left on his contract and then a player option that he is very likely going to decline. And it doesn't sound like the Heat up to this point are willing to commit to giving Jimmy Butler that max contract, which let me know in the comments section whether or not you feel the Heat should be giving out this type of money. But it sounds like the 76ers would be willing to do so, and the Miami Herald put out on Wednesday that, quote, 2 other teams have made it known in league circles that they would be willing to trade for Butler and sign him to a max level contract, which is not a surprise, because if you are one of these other teams that feel like you have a chance to sort of maybe, jumpstart your organization a little bit and get some valuable experience for some of your young players, or if you are, especially I feel like in some of these small markets where they understand that, perfect superstar isn't just going to walk into free agency. It seems like we are possibly past that point in NBA history where these drastic free agency signings are going to happen. Now we'll see it when time comes, and who knows, maybe I'm proved wrong in this upcoming offseason. But I think that, Butler, he is not the perfect superstar, but he is somebody who, from a toughness standpoint, from setting a culture. Now, there are still people and I think that the fact that the Timberwolves have made it to the Western Conference Finals has sort of had some people pushing back on this idea, but Jimmy Butler, for the first handful of years in his career, was seen as a little bit of a locker room cancer, sort of fought his way out of a number of different situations, most notably with Minnesota and Philadelphia just before he came to Miami, and that he didn't necessarily get along with people. But I think that there's definitely some legitimacy to it. That Timberwolves roster, there was no winning culture, and it did take them landing the, lottery win, getting Anthony Edwards, who could be a culture setter for them. But, this idea of, well, if Towns had, won the finals and been a significant part of that, Andrew Wiggins, who Butler was very critical of, if he was a massive part of the Warriors championship, if that were to sort of come around. Listen, that's just an online narrative. I don't think it's worth fully diving into. Jimmy Butler, I do think, has been pretty accurate in terms of a lot of his statements, in terms of the idea of this winning culture. But I do think that he also sort of has his own problems, and we have seen that the injuries and sort of the lack of motivation for the regular season has come to hurt them to, some degree. And as a result, this Heat team, where do they feel like they can go from here in terms of, is there a chance they can make another run to the finals? Now, they played the Nuggets last year, and I believe it was a 5 or 6 game series. Either way, I never really had any doubts that the Nuggets were going to win that series. It seemed like they were in a different class than Miami was from a talent standpoint, and as much as there's a coaching element as well, Eric Spoelstra is the best coach in the league. At the same time, the Mike Malone was great in that series as well. But just saying, in general here, the Heat were not on the same level of the Nuggets last year. As we have a comment from Shots Below the Belt, Jimmy Buckets is Heat culture. Pay the man. Who else does Miami have? Tyler Hero, Terry Rozier, maybe Bam. I would say that the Heat probably should pay Jimmy Butler, but to your point, who else do they really have? Bam being the maybe there is probably what I disagree with most there. I think that Bam does not get the credit he deserves in terms of being an all-world defender, and no, he's not necessarily a guy that you can center your offense around, but during that playoff run last year, I think that Bam did a lot of these sort of unsung things in terms of setting off-ball screens and the way that he sort of crashes the boards and all of that. Bam is a piece, but that being said, if Jimmy walks and this isn't a playoff team, I can also understand your point of what is Bam really going to provide for you at that point if you aren't necessarily a finals contending team. But I mean, yeah, absolutely. The Heat don't necessarily have a great backup plan if Jimmy Butler were to not stay with the Heat long term. Tyler Hero is, as much as we know the offense can be a lot of fun with him at times, and during that Boston series, I believe it was game 2 when he went off and showed that does he have some level of playmaking that just hasn't been scratched yet, but at the same time he was getting absolutely murdered on the defensive end, so definitely not somebody I would be comfortable handing the keys of the organization to. And ultimately here, I mean, do you think that the Heat can stay finals contenders? And in this Eastern Conference, I do think that it is open and the Heat can absolutely reestablish themselves. But I think that from a front office standpoint, they need to sort of have this conversation with Jimmy Butler. And Pat Riley, again, talked about how frustrated he was with the situation. I think he and Jimmy Butler kind of need to get on the same page, and he needs to get through to Jimmy. We need you to be available more and stop putting us, not, again, goes beyond just Jimmy Butler, but this team cannot continue to bank on getting some type of Cinderella run as a 7 or 8 seed. There needs to be more of a commitment to the regular season and having success there to put together an easier path. Listen, the Celtics are in the NBA Finals and nobody is giving them any credit because of their postseason run. But at the same time, Celtics are never going to complain with that, and the Heat would be the same way. As much as it's awesome that they make this run towards the Cinderella run last year as the 8th seed, it's a really fun story, but at the same time, I just don't think it's sustainable. As Shots Below the Belt, perhaps a load management to maintain Jimmy's health. I mean, I do think that that's part of the issue as well. I understand you want to maintain Jimmy's health because without him in the playoffs, the Heat aren't going to be able to compete. It's just a fact. But that being said as well, the reason why, and not the reason why, it was a freak injury that happened, but Jimmy Butler got hurt in an extra game, a play-in tournament game that, if you want to sort of dive into the way that the NBA views it, and I think that they need to change it to actual postseason, but all of the stats from these play-in tournament games just go into a void in space. They aren't counted anywhere. That is the type of game that Jimmy Butler got hurt in because this Heat team underachieved during the regular season. So I think it's bringing back Jimmy Butler. and it's trying to figure out some other sort of supplemental move, I feel like, as well during this offseason to, again, try and get to a point where they aren't having to work their way through the play-in tournament, because I've referenced it before. As much as, again, fun Cinderella run, the fact that they were able to make the finals last year, they were down late in the fourth quarter to the Chicago Bulls, and that was sort of the beginning of Jimmy Butler putting together this run. But shots fall differently. If the Chicago Bulls got hot down that stretch as well, they don't even make the playoffs, and the legacy of Jimmy Butler is just very different. So, I like Jimmy a lot. You have to, really appreciate the story, his backstory, and the way that he has gotten to this point in his career, in his life. It is all extremely motivational, but something does need to, and again, I don't know if it's from a Heat organizational standpoint of understanding maybe this is what Jimmy Butler is, of playing, average 55 games a year, maybe, 57 is probably a little bit more accurate. But the team, again, needs to find a way to not be a perennial play-in tournament team, because if that is the case, Giannis doesn't get hurt, they probably, another situation where they probably don't make the finals last year either. But again, let me know in the comments section. I do think that this is a pretty layered conversation and is definitely a storyline that we are going to continue to talk about through the offseason. But we have to take our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, I want to run through the Game 4 matchup last night between the Edmonton Oilers and the Dallas Stars. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We're running a little late here, so gonna try and make this an efficient segment here, talking about the Edmonton Oilers, who were able to even up the series last night with a 5-2 win against the Dallas Stars in the Western Conference Finals. And it was a little bit reminiscent, it felt like, at least early on in sort of the script that this all played out, of the Game 3 matchup, where in that one, it was the Oilers jumping out to the 2-0 lead and watching the tide sort of turn right in front of our eyes, where other way around in this game, the Stars scored 58 seconds into this game and just absolutely controlled the first few minutes. They built up a 2-0 lead on their first 4 shots of the night, and it did feel like this was going to be a little bit detrimental to Stuart Skinner coming off of that rough finish to Game 3, where specifically that goal that he allowed in the third period is really what did them in. It was a little bit weak. It was Robertson just sort of stuffing the puck in the post right past him. And, the second goal really wasn't his fault in this Game 4 matchup. It took a very unfortunate bounce off of his defender, Darnell Nurse's leg, and just sort of squeaked into the net from there. But it was interesting how that second goal goes in. Again, 2nd and 4 shots. The broadcast sort of jumps right to this fan that looks very upset in the stands, and he sort of started giving, it looked like, Skinner the get him out of here finger point. And again, this was a very unfortunate goal for Skinner, but I thought that that moment at least was pretty indicative of where this series seemed to be, where Skinner was this big storyline coming out of Game 3. If he continues to struggle in this one, I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised whatsoever if they ended up pulling him, but instead it was the rest of the team that really picked him up and limited the damage from then on out, where they stayed calm, they started putting together good shifts, and they ended up tying the game up before the end of the period, where Corey Perry, who hadn't dressed since Game 5, I believe it was, in the Vancouver series, he came back playing on that second line, and, you know, alongside as well in this situation, Ryan McLeod, who had also not dressed last game, and he helped sort of lead a break for them, get a shot on net, and then it was Darnell Nurse at that point as well, who was really impactful for them, just sort of causing a little bit of chaos in front of the net, and in the end, Ryan Suter of the Stars fell into his own goalie, Jake Ottinger, basically at the same time of Corey Perry's shot. The puck pops loose, and it was Ryan McLeod able to sort of come in and clean up that play while Ottinger was knocked over. So that regained some of the momentum. By the way, the energy in Edmonton last night, it was so electric leading into it. The way that it entirely dissipated, it felt like, through those first 7 minutes or so, and the way that they were able to respond, just such a fun, playoff hockey in Canada especially is a special thing. But the Oilers then went on to tie that game up later in the first period with a McDavid break. He sort of then, those who know hockey maybe better than me could maybe give a little bit of a better explanation. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about just putting the puck on net. He shoots it on a break, and it goes right off of Ottinger's pad and bounces right out. It looked like it would have been like sort of a perfect bank shot pass to fall into the stuck of the stick, I should say, of Evan Bouchard, who puts it back in. So, at the end of the day, it was kind of no harm, no foul for falling down behind 0-2 in that game. And then in the second period, we saw sort of the benefits of that momentum shift heading into it, where it started with the first special teams goal finally of this series. Both of these teams were scoreless on the power play headed into this game, but that does remain the case because the the special teams goal came on a shorthander for the Oilers, where they got a little bit of a fast break opportunity 2-on-1, and it was Janmark who was able to put it in to take the lead. And then the Oilers, as they sort of frequently do, understanding that the penalty is running to an end and you were about to get another man back, sort of load up with their top guys, McDavid and Draisaitl, and they come through once again. McDavid makes a steal, sort of relays it up to Neiman, and it was Draisaitl, who hadn't scored in either of the previous two games, nets his goal, and ultimately the Oilers just sort of ride this one to a victory. And it's been a crazy series. Wayne Gretzky had that pretty funny comment where it was something along the lines of, the one thing we know about this series is that we know nothing about this series. And yeah, I mean, the momentum shifts all the way throughout this series up to this point. It's been a roller coaster, but that's what playoff hockey is all about. And we are currently sitting on two really entertaining conference finals series. And it is one of those situations where it doesn't feel like we have any type of a Cinderella run up to this point. And as much as we do sort of love those darling teams, it feels like the right four teams are currently still in the playoff picture, and it's been incredible hockey and execution up to this point that it has been super entertaining to watch. The Oilers ended up getting their 5th goal on an empty netter. There was a little bit of controversy that came with it. I think that there was that Robertson play where Bouchard ends up taking a hit to the face, but he made the pass anyways, and then the Oilers were able to sort of relay it up the ice and end up getting that long shot empty netter to fall. Do you think the lineup changes made by I always mispronounce his name, but the coach for the Oilers can continue to work in this series? I mean, Gretzky talked about it a lot during the intermission reports that it was a pretty smart job of him to organize the lineups the way that he did last night, in terms of the Oilers were dealing with a variety of different injuries, and having Corey Perry and having McLeod both return in this game, inserting them high up in the lineups to be able to sort of function in a higher powered offense to get comfortable. I thought that Corey Perry was excellent last night. He was involved on a couple different scoring opportunities, but he made some nice defensive plays as well in this game. He had a big deflection at one point on a Dallas fast break. So I think that it's definitely, they're in a great position as things currently stand right now. I think that the biggest part of it is sort of trying to find a way to protect Skinner. Again, had a nice bounce back last night to be able to calm himself after the messy start, especially when that second goal goes in off of Nurse and it just feels like he can't catch a break, to be able to settle himself back down and get into that game. But at the same time, we saw the Stars really held from an offensive perspective, and the pressure didn't have to be on Skinner at that point, because we know when this Oilers offense is clicking that they absolutely get results. One other quick thing here, should probably mention at least before moving on, is the fact that the Stars were, I mean, everybody obviously in every sport is dealing with injuries up to this point in the postseason. But last night we saw Dallas really sort of start to have some of these pile up, and the most significant one was Chris Tanev, who took a shot off of his ankle during the second period. He went to the bench and he was sitting there for a couple minutes before then eventually making his way down the bench and went into the locker room, was ruled out for the remainder of the game. This is somebody who was in the top of the league, 3rd in blocked shots during the regular season, a massive part of what Dallas does, which is they feel like a very complete team. They have a good defense in front of one of the best goalies in the league, best performing goalies, at least right now, in Ottinger. And we don't necessarily have an update. Knowing hockey and knowing Tanev, he probably will be back at some point, but definitely a tough loss for Dallas last night. Ideally, they are able to get him back. I believe we have, I'm going to double check real quick, but I believe we got Game 5 tomorrow night. Going to be in Dallas, so we'll see if the Stars can respond in that game. As things currently stand, they are minus 130 favorites in that one. So let us know your predictions in the comment section. But we're going to be taking our final break of the show now. And when we come back on the other side, we had a very interesting, little bit controversial series of events take place in the MLB yesterday, where we saw the Mets involved in a little bit of a miscommunication led to a DFA, but we will dive into that whole story after this quick break. Stick with us, and we will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We're headed into our final segment of the day. Going to be talking a little bit of baseball here because we saw a very interesting series of events unfold for the New York Mets coming off of this very brutal season up to this point. And we saw yesterday Jorge Lopez, out of frustration for his own play and obviously the team success as a whole up to this point, sort of toss his glove up in the air. It goes over the netting and lands in the crowd. Now, from a fan perspective, fan took a picture with the glove and she seemed perfectly okay with it. But then after the game, there was an interview with Lopez where he made some comments that are sort of being left up to interpretation. Now, the act of throwing the glove into the stands, although it wasn't hostile and the fans seemed to have no problem with it whatsoever, that is definitely a level of conduct that I'm sure the Mets don't appreciate anyways. But it gets more interesting from there, where Lopez was asked about the incident, and again, a little bit of a communication error, it seems like, between Lopez and the media, where you can sort of be the judge of it, because I don't know if we necessarily have a definitive answer on it, where he was asked about the situation, and what it sounded like, at least to me initially, was that he said he is on the worst team in the effing MLB, and he was asked to clarify if that's what he meant, and he did double down on it and say yes. Now, that quote of, I'm on the worst team and such, I think I've been on the worst team in probably the whole effing MLB. That is the quote that really started circulating around social media. And for the Mets and Steve Cohen, obviously the owner, who is very obviously, in tune with social media, he and the organization sees this, and they decided to designate Jorge Lopez for assignment just like that. There was really no second thought to it. Now, since then, there has been a little bit of a correction. We don't have anything definitive still here at this point, but Lopez, English is not his first language. He grew up in Puerto Rico, and I'm sure that he's spoke English for a lot of his life, but it's not his first language. And there is, when he says worst team, there is a little bit of a pause that seems like it could have been the start of him saying teammate. Now, again, it's a lot up to interpretation, and the fact that it sounds like he did sort of double down on this idea a couple times. He was even specifically asked, talking about the team itself, that's what you're saying the worst is the league? And he said he feels like probably a little bit of both, that he's the worst teammate on the worst team. So definitely let me know how you feel in the comments section. I know it's a little bit confusing. We don't have rights to the audio here on the show, but definitely give it a look, because again, when I first saw this, I saw it with the sort of typical ESPN quote graphic of saying the worst team, and I listened to it, and sort of confirmation bias, that's what I heard. But I can see the argument for both sides as well. And again, it's just sort of a messy situation as a whole. But regardless, the damage is done. And again, the fact that he threw the glove into the crowd is probably, good enough justification for the Mets to move on from him. But let me know if you feel that he was sort of wrongly framed in this situation. But regardless, for the Mets, it has been a pretty rough season for them, where just a couple years ago, they were winning 100 plus games. It was 101 to be specific. They get bounced early in the postseason then, and they just have not been the same team since then. And they have a lot of the same offensive contributors in Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil, Francisco Lindor, Starling Marte, but none of them are having the same statistical seasons. And as a result, we've seen the Mets really be struggling since April 21st. They have the worst record in the MLB at 10-25. They entered May with a winning record, but they now sit here, in these last couple days of the month, and they are 22-33 and are likely not, coming up anytime in the near future. So it's been a really rough stretch for the Mets, and you have to sort of consider the big picture with them, understanding you have a very expensive contract in Lindor for the near future. If you were going to move on from him, you are not going to get much in return there. Then there's the Pete Alonso question, where Alonso isn't playing bad necessarily, but at the same time, batting average is way down. He's still on pace for 35, 36 home runs. So it is it's a tough conversation as he approaches free agency. He's going to want a lot of money. The Mets are going to want to try and probably keep their fans happy to some degree. Is that going to be giving out this long-term extension to Pete Alonso? I'm not sure. It is kind of a tough situation there, as we have a comment. A burst of frustration. Lopez needed to stay professional, but losing is never fun, so throwing the glove into the crowd is crazy, but hey, at least it wasn't a bat. Absolutely. And again, it was kind of harmless in the end. The fans were taking pictures with the glove. If you are in that section, probably feeling like it was an extremely memorable moment, obviously not in a fun way after a 10-3 loss ultimately. And it's been sort of getting their teeth kicked in a little bit this series against the Dodgers. But yeah, ultimately it's tough. Lopez, very emotionally charged person, you could say, and this is somebody with a lot of talent, was just an all-star a couple years ago in 2022. It wasn't for the Mets at that point, but definitely needs to stay composed in that moment. It is pretty hard to, defend. Like I said, it ultimately didn't result in anything all too significant, but at the same time, it could have, and there really just isn't a precedent for, getting away with that type of thing. And especially, I think that the Mets probably, to some degree, used Lopez as a little bit of a scapegoat to, DFA him and sort of put the attention on him, as opposed to the fact that, like I mentioned, the team is absolutely struggling right now. Specifically, I think 10-25 since that date that I mentioned of April 21st. So it's been really rough, obviously, and Mets fans don't need to be reminded of that. But we are just sort of seeing the dysfunction of this organization coming to life right now in a very emphatic way. And I'm not totally sure there is a great fix for the Mets moving forward. But again, let me know your thoughts in the comments section. That is all we have time for today. Did want to sort of throw in some MLB at the end of the show today, though, because I'm going to be joining Sam Menzie on the GSMC baseball podcast later this afternoon in just about 20 minutes. We have a variety of different shows here at the GSMC Sports Network, and myself, Garrison, and Jeremy Lapidus are all going to be joining Sam on his show in just under half an hour. So definitely be sure to tune into that, and we'll be going over all types of baseball headlines, probably this to a little bit of a larger extent as well. I want to get their thoughts and whether or not they thought this Lopez situation was a language barrier type of thing, or if he was justifiably sort of released in this situation. But that is all we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Remember to like, follow, subscribe. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. Like I mentioned, I'm going to be joining Sam Menzie on the baseball podcast in 20 minutes, so tune into that. But as for this show, we will be back tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. So we will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.